Hello, and welcome to my show, Novel Connections, where we connect developmental theorist ideas to different contemporary novels in order to explore how literature can be analyzed through a developmental lens. Such a feat allows us to see ourselves within characters that serve as developmental agents in our books and enables us to propose our own schemes against injustice. Today's book is The Madonna of Excelsior by Zakes Madda and smoothly transitions from apartheid era to post-apartheid South Africa. It follows the story of Nikki, one of the women involved in the 1971 case in which 19 citizens in the black township of Excelsior were charged under the Immorality Act, which prohibited sex between blacks and whites. Among the accused were 14 black women and 5 white men, the latter of which received preferential treatment by the court system through bail. In this story, Nikki gives birth to Poppy, a mixed child who is aware of her physical difference and its significance, but determined to make change in the new South Africa, a hope still infiltrated by apartheid-era prejudices. To Edward Carr, stories in development are significant modes for understanding new opportunities in development and recognizing one's positionality. In his words, the stories that we are told are clues to the larger narratives in which we are positioned when we conduct work in the global South. By looking at the course of Nikki and Poppy's lives through a historically deep and geographically broad lens, we might recognize our own roles in these narratives and rework them accordingly, in such a way that subverts existing power relations today. We might see how we implicitly uphold racist regimes and change our positions in this narrative. Now, let's talk more about stories before we get into the story itself. Madda holds that the Madonna of Excelsior is informed by actual events in Excelsior, South Africa, which remain in the public record, and by several public figures who bear their real names. In the words of N.S. Zulu, the collective voice in the Madonna of Excelsior presents the experiences of all those who were affected in one way or another by the social conflict in the polarized zones during the heyday of apartheid. Consequently, the collective voice seems to demand the reader's involvement in the process of challenging his or her assumptions, as well as those of the novel and the author. I want to connect Zulu's use of the collective voices of Nikki, Poppy, and Poppy's brother Willeke, among others, to Richard Nagar's concept of co-authorship in feminist alliance work. Although the story is told by one individual, Madda, it is informed by many voices, which can be seen as a form of co-authorship, Nagar's solution to the impossibility of depicting past events in their entirety and depth. Nagar believes that co-authoring stories is useful in alliance work because they bring distinctions between knowledge bound to the academy and knowledge produced through struggles with oppression. In this way, subjectivities are legitimized and can be used as tools for mobilization. The Madonna of Excelsior employs many voices in this narrative, from black female rape victims and their mixed children to Afrikaner council members who desperately clutch to a white-ruled South Africa. This is not to say that both of these voices are efficient in eliminating injustice. The collective voice in this story simply creates a literary landscape that exposes the remnants of post-apartheid South Africa through various perspectives, which might allow us to pursue more refined interventions and become potential allies as readers. The divergent voices of radical racists and black resistance figures color our imaginaries for future social development through their opposition. For instance, in the book, Nikki explains to Poppy, the Boers are still the rulers. Even though his movement has been unbanned, here in Excelsior, we still only enter the hotel as cleaners. At the post office, there are still only 2 queues, one for whites and the other for blacks. On the other hand, Tjaart Crochet, who clings to the rightful power of the Afrikaner over the black South African, states in the book, okay, many an African child has played with black pickaninnies and eaten in their homes, but it is not something I boast about at a dinner table. It was just part of the reality of growing up in the Free State Platland. Something better forgotten than broadcast at a dinner table. This distinction in perspectives, one of which is discriminatory and the other of which experiences that discrimination, allows us to examine the complexities of organizing and struggle in relation to subjectivity, and potentially help us identify systems that avert abuse of power. And now that we've looked at how developmental theories can be applied to Madda's writing style in The Madonna of Excelsior, let's dive into some of the book's content. The Immorality Act of 1927 made white and black sexual relations illegal, and thus 19 people were charged when 14 black women gave birth to mixed babies. However, the white men's involvement in the case changed its nature significantly. Their charges were dropped after too many cases came to light. One Afrikaner, Stefan Kranje, brought public sympathy after killing himself in shame after the case. Reverend Bornemann died with the sympathies of those who believed the devil made the Afrikaner to covertly covet the black woman while publicly detesting her. These prejudice-driven sympathies, combined with the legal work of Adam de Vries, which set the men free, expose the structural violence of the era which disadvantages black women. I want to look at this idea through Paul Farmer's discussion of structural violence, which he defines as violence exerted systematically, that is, indirectly, by everyone who belongs to a certain social order. Hence the discomfort these ideas provoke in a moral economy, still geared to pinning praise or blame on individual actors. Looking at things through the structural violence that underlies them helps us to see how the past is still present. In the context of this story, it can be seen how miscegenation imbued the Afrikaner power structure, and when too many cases began to embarrass the white man, the laws were no longer enforced. This instigated the attempt of erasure in the Excelsior 19 case, and erasure is one of Farmer's central elements to structural violence. Farmer states, erasing history is perhaps the most common explanatory sleight of hand relied upon by the architects of structural violence. Erasure or distortion of history is part of the process of desocialization necessary for the emergence of hegemonic accounts of what happened and why. Now, this desocialization is attempted in many ways through the attempted erasure of the Excelsior 19. Adam de Vries, an Afrikaner attorney, arranges bail for the women once they withdrew their admissions of guilt against the white men. Nonetheless, de Vries formally asserted that the men had been framed by the blacks in a black conspiracy. This insinuates an attempted erasure of the case for the sake of the white man, with details to fill in the gaps. Indeed, Farmer asserts, imbalances of power cannot be erased without distortion of meaning. Without a historically deep and geographically broad analysis, one that takes into account political economy, we risk seeing only the residue of meaning. Adam de Vries, among others, attempt to distort the meaning of this case, and in doing so, desocialize Nikki from a reality without oppression. Meta states, her greatest anger was directed at those who had duped her. People had made promises. Messages had been sent to her cell in Winburg. Do not give evidence against the white man, Nikki. They will look after you and your child. They will engage the services of a good lawyer for you. They will pay the support of your child. These promises were made to Nikki and were meant to erase the case for the social welfare of the men. Meda summarizes this distortion of meaning in history, not just of the case, but of apartheid itself through a passage. The Afrikaner was fighting to preserve the laws of God, which were codified in South Africa, into the set of laws that comprised apartheid. Apartheid was therefore prescribed by the Bible. In this story, structural violence pervades through this kind of narrative, one that mangles the ropes of reality and paints a distorted portrait of the past to reassure oppression's prevalence. I want to talk about another way by which Paul Farmer's conception of structural violence is seen in this book. Farmer states, indeed, one could argue that structural violence now comes with symbolic props far more powerful, indeed far more convincing, than anything we might serve up to counter them. An example includes the discounting of any divergent voice as unrealistic or utopian. Of course, this is seen in the context of post-apartheid South Africa in reference to black voices. This is particularly prevalent in the experiences of Poppy, who is mixed race, as she serves as a member of the council and represents the movement. In one meeting, Poppy proposes that all proceedings be conducted in English because, in South Africa, Afrikaans is still the language of the oppressor, offering a divergent voice, which is immediately met with disregard. Jacques Creuset of the Freedom Front tritely remarked, "No one speaks English in Excelsior." Nonetheless, Poppy's motion later passed, demonstrating how her marginalized voice, discounted as unrealistic through forces of structural violence, still led to change. Poppy's change-making here reminded me of a quote by Humphreys related to the transgression of social boundaries, particularly in regard to her gender. Humphreys states, "The trigger for bringing both men and women into a community of practice where empowerment is generative in nature is arguably best provided by collective action around a concern where gender is of secondary importance." Indeed, Poppy's presence as a female in the Mixed Gender Council is brought up in the book when an Afrikaner member of the council jeers her for her hairy legs. But later, she effectively mobilizes on an issue where her gender is not central to the issue. Poppy displays political leverage amongst the group in the decision to use English instead of Afrikaans in proceedings, an issue that doesn't concern her gender, but rather sits as a central claim that all members of the movement can vouch for. Humphrey states, if the exercise of informed choice is recognized as part of the expansion of human capacities, mixed gender groups may demonstrate that the growth of women's power does not have to come at a man's expense. Poppy's ability to swing the vote to English proceedings demonstrates that the growth of her power did not come at the expense of men, but of white men, which is an important distinction here. Through these novel connections, you can see how development theories can be applied to literature and allow our imaginaries to expand regarding possible routes of change. We can identify ourselves as developmental agents in our characters and analyze how they challenged oppressive regimes fraught with structural violence. Like Poppy, who is encased in structural violence and shifted parts of her society through her political activity and voice, we can identify sources of violence in our own communities and act upon them through developmental ideas. Literature is simply the mode of our societal stories, then outlined by development ideas for the potential imaginings of social change. What will you imagine?